I am Garrett Sussman. I'm the head of content at Grade Us, and really excited to talk to you guys about email review requests. So, before everyone gets in, just agenda is to go through some of the best practices on how we at Grade Us recommend using emails to generate more reviews, how to actually set it up on Grade Us platform if you haven't done it. And then one thing I'm really excited about is just recently our Zapier integration has come out of beta, and that's now easily available for people to use to automate review requests. So we'll take some questions at the end.
Here we go. Here I am.
There she is. How are you doing today?
I am doing lovely. I've already, as have you, been working for several hours. So this is my fourth meeting of the day.
I know it's really interesting being on a bi-coastal team. It's like I'm on the East Coast, so obviously I get all my stuff done before the majority of our coworkers show up in the Seattle area, and
Yep.
you do East Coast hours frequently as well.
I do indeed. Although I meddle between I feel like because I am on the West Coast though, and towards the end of my day, which would be 2 or 3 o'clock, it's the middle-ish of other people's day here, so I end up working longer hours. But that's good for the customers.
That's the weird thing, right? It's the life work balance of not wanting to leave when there's still more to do, but at the same time, taking the time to be with your family and
exactly. That's a rough one, especially now during this time where you're working at home. And so it's I have 2 little ones that are like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? So it's tough.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today. I gave a little heads up, but for the folks who are here, they're trickling in. We are going to cover basically best practices when it comes to requesting reviews from your customers via email. Obviously, a lot of Grade Us customers are either single location, multi-location, or agencies and resellers who are offering reputation management as a service. So we're going to walk through how to set up your email review requests, how to maybe optimize your email campaigns. I'm going to ask Afshan, what you've seen in terms of what works really well, or any tips that you've seen of customers having really effective campaigns. And then really excited at the end to go through our new Zapier app that's out of beta. It's now available to everybody, which we're excited about, which allows you to automate review requests, basically pull them in from either a mail service provider that you already have set up, and we'll talk about different use cases there. So let's dive in. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, does that sound good to you, Afshan?
Yes, that sounds lovely.
Okay, so you can all see my screen now. So basically, what we're looking at here is the main Grade Us dashboard. Now, it's interesting. We provide all of these different ways to request reviews through Grade Us, and we do have a lot of our customers will just use either the button on their website that says review us. They'll just include a link on their website of the main review funnel landing page. They'll do the email signature snippets. But we found that the most effective way to ask for reviews through our system is through the email review requests. And every now and again, there are people, we find that customers don't actually set it up. What would you say, Afshan? Do you think how important review requests using the email functionality is to having Grade Us work for your business?
Highly important. I would go so far as to say it's the most important functionality that you can use on this platform. If you're not using it, or if you're underutilizing it, you're just doing yourself a disservice, because we even have, I don't think it's that underutilized, thankfully. We do have just hooks set up where we can see where our highest number of clicks are on the site, and this blows everything else out of the water. So if you're not using it, I definitely think you should be using it. Or if you're underutilizing, you're you're just doing yourself a disservice, because this is just the easiest way to personally contact your customers. You can we'll get into it, but you can customize the templates, and so that's what I think.
Yeah, No, I agree with you. And one thing that to your point about the webhooks of knowing how people use the app that we'll go into as well is a surprisingly amount, and they might have their reasons for it, but a surprising amount of customers add recipients individually, like on a person by person basis.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have ways to upload bulk customers, which would save you time. So it's like if you didn't know how to upload a recipient, in bulk, we're going to cover that through this webinar. So let's get started. Basically, we're looking at the review funnel landing page. This is what you see when you log into Grade Us. First step is you come over to the navigation. You're going to click on the review requests um, navigation here. And for anyone who's never set up the email review request, you'll actually see the setup first. We'll have more tabs that appear once we get this going. But when you are setting it up, usually we just have a few simple questions that you can modify after you get in there, but this is the first step. When it comes to setting up like the from name, the from email address, the reply email address, usually you want to personalize these. So in the from name, I usually recommend that you actually put the name of an employee at your company. Sometimes it's the owner, sometimes it's the head of support. It depends on the business it is. If it's a law firm, maybe it's the main partner. You can also use a business name, but I find that actually using a person's name makes you, like a real person is behind there, makes it more accessible. Do you have any thoughts on that, Afshan, when it comes to like who the email should come from?
I actually agree with you. I think that also when it comes from a person's name, you're more inclined to click on it rather than it just coming from a business name if you don't know where it's coming from. But I do actually, the majority of the accounts that I go into do use the business name, but I just think that's what seems natural. But I do agree. It seems more personal if it comes from a person's name. And it's, in my opinion, if I get an email from a person's name, I'm more inclined to click on it.
I agree. And I think that also kind of probably speaks to the bandwidth, whereas like you don't always have one person who can reply to these emails. Like given that for the majority of the time, people won't actually reply to a review request email, we can have the reply email go to a specific person. So, if you are able to put someone's name up there, you probably want to have it actually go to that person as well. But that might be a reason that you only use the business name is if you know that specific person wouldn't be able to reply all the time. But it doesn't come up too often. So
Right.
we'll do, in this example, we'll say Jesse from Taco and Pina, or you could just do, the name of the person, the first name is just what they're going to see in the inbox. Now, the interesting thing for the from email is you can put this from your business's email. However, whatever email address you use here is going to impact the deliverability, whether the email gets to your customers. And so for that reason, I usually recommend just using our default, which is the reviewmgr.com email address. Afshan, what are your thoughts there when it comes to deliverability? Because I know you have a lot of conversations with customers about that.
Anytime someone writes into us with deliverability issues, this is the first place I look because 99.5% of the time it's because they're using custom email. Um, the reason behind that being, so what's essentially happening is it's not actually coming from your email address, right? It's white labeling ours to come from your email address. So a lot of email servers don't like that happening. They recognize it as being weird or shady. And so the email server then will not even attempt to deliver those and they usually bounce. So if you do choose to use that, I highly recommend that you send a bunch of tests just to make sure they're getting delivered. There's no bouncing going on, and before you actually full blown start sending out review requests. It's hard for us to tell. I mean, because obviously it's a server thing, so you can't say like, well, will it work for this? We don't know. So you just have to input it and do some testing. But
Exactly. So
deliverability
test,
with
test, test.
ours is very, very high. I mean, honestly, like almost 100%. So
And that is, yeah, and that's why we use like a review MGR as a very generic email address. So it doesn't, obviously for our resellers and white labels, it doesn't say grade us on there. So there's nothing explicit there. And then it's kind of what you would expect from a review request email. So just something to think about for those options. Now I'm gonna just put in, like hello, we'll do a hello at Taco and Pina. But in this case, this is where you would want to put in the right email address of who's going to receive that reply, and that won't impact deliverability at all. And like I said, we don't usually expect someone to reply to a review request email, but it does happen from time to time. And to provide good support, you want to have that available. Next up is default time frame to send the first email. The vast majority of people have this as soon as possible. I'll show you where you can adjust this if you want to, and there might be reasons that you want to not have the email go out right when you upload the recipient. But by default, we'll have this here. And then deactivate recipients on click. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it has to do with the email drip campaign, which is, whether someone opens or clicks the button in the email, we have triggers that would actually turn off the rest of the campaign so you don't get email 2, 3, however many you set up. So these are all set, and we'll show you how to adjust that as well. And so this will take us over to our email templates. Now, when we get over there, a lot of the defaults that we have set up are really effective. They've worked incredibly well over time. There are a few aspects that we highly recommend personalizing it and customizing it. We'll go through that in a sec, but a lot of it, the defaults are there because they do what they're supposed to do, which is generate reviews. So now we see a few of these different tabs, the recipients, the email tab, and then this client and staff form tab, which we'll go through. In the recipients, this is where a lot of the information of who's receiving the emails comes in. As you start to add those, it'll show you, so one of the ideas behind the recipients, and I'm going to jump to the emails in a second, but just want to touch on this, is the idea is that you don't always, a lot of people, their instinct is to upload 100, customers right when they start and hopefully get like 100 reviews right at the get-go. Usually there's more value in having a steady stream of reviews. You don't necessarily want to get a whole volume of emails all at the same time, or of reviews at the same time, because that could trigger fraud from, like Google or some of the different review sites. If they see you've never gotten a review before, or it's been a couple months and all of a sudden you have 50 of them, that could be suspicious. So the idea with this recipients tab is to automate where it goes out a few every day, and so then you can get that steady stream of reviews, which is going to be more valuable anyway, because usually when customers are checking out your reviews, they want to see newer reviews, and so getting all at once doesn't look as authentic, if you will. So here's the email template. So by default, what we've got is these 3 emails over 7 days. You can customize so much of this. So however you decide to use it is up to you. A lot of it is just basic copy where we keep things really simple. In terms of best practices when it comes to emails, naturally, you don't want a whole wall of text that someone has to read. You want to focus on the main call to action when it comes to generating reviews, is get a positive review, or if you're using our segmenting options, get them to either leave internal feedback. The point of these emails is to get them to the review funnel page. So that first email is sent out to go as soon as possible. Now you can click on any of these components to adjust them. So say for instance, on the first email, you don't want it to go out as soon as possible. You have up to 14 days to send out that first email. Usually the reason we recommend as soon as possible is because you're top of mind. So normally if you're in, like a doctor's office or at a restaurant and you're uploading that email through your POS system or through kiosk mode, the customer has just had that interaction with the business. And so they're most likely to give a more in-depth review with a lot of written attributes, because they've just had that experience. So that'd be my recommendation. Ashram, do you have any thoughts or of when they might not want to do as soon as possible? Or are there any times where you see businesses not doing that that's effective? Or do you always recommend as soon as possible for that first email?
Majority of the time, I would say as soon as possible is the best bet. There's, you know, at most a handful of like use cases that I can think of that you might not want to do that. Um, One I like to use is like if you're, you said healthcare. If you go in and you get like surgery and you're sending these out, you probably don't want it to go to somebody who's like recovering from surgery, like that day, that moment, the next day. So as you can see, as Garrett showed, like you can schedule it several days out. So I remember like I had I'd gotten like my tonsils removed like several years back. And like the last thing that I would want to get is that like as soon as I get home or even the next day. But I do remember I got something that was texted to me for a review, but it was like a week out. So that's the example I kind of like to use. Maybe like a plumber that does work, you just want to like make sure that everything goes well for a couple days or whatever before you send them the request. So if like something bad happens that night, they get this review request and they're like, well, this broke, or you know what I mean? So those are just a couple of use cases that I can think of where it's just like if you've done work for somebody, you want to make sure they're happy, everything's working fine for a few days, and then send it to them.
Makes a lot of sense. I agree. And also, if you notice too, this is a relatively recent addition, but the ability to send on weekends is the only other time which we've kind of built in is
Mhm.
if you have a business that's more B2B and not B2C, then you might not want to send the review request during the weekend. So you can actually modify this as well. So for instance, like if for us, if it's someone, who's buying SaaS software and they work in the B2B business, they're probably not thinking about that during their free time. It's very much a business related type of experience. So in that case, I might not want to send the review on the weekend.
Right.
So moving on, in terms of the subject line, best recommendation there is keeping it simple. If you are going to modify this, don't make it much longer than what we have here, like 70, 80 characters at most, because when it comes to the subject line, you're only going to see what comes, into the inbox, and it's going to appear slightly different on mobile versus desktop as well. The only reason I would go longer is if as you go to 80, more than 80 characters, maybe you cut it off at a point that makes them want to open it. So it's like, leave a
Dot, dot.
review and find out. Yeah, exactly. Like, but I would test that out. I probably wouldn't risk it too much. I would say be straightforward, use plain language, and then what you'll notice in our default is you can personalize it with the first name. And so by using these placeholders, which we have here on the right-hand side, that will pull in the information that you put in when you submit the recipient in the first place. So where it says first name here, that will actually pull in and it will say, hey, Afshan, do you have a moment to review us? So Afshan, thoughts on the subject line?
Um, to be honest with you, like don't really see a ton of people change that. So,
Hmm.
I think keeping it simple is the best thing, if not just even shorter. Like I know that when
Yeah.
I open my email box, like the longer I see the subject line, the more spammy I think it is, you know?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
um, the, at most, like you said, that's what I would keep it at, if not shorter.
And that's the interesting thing. I'm glad you mentioned that, like longer, it feeling more spammy. Is this the way email is working? Sometimes the more plain and simple your
Yeah.
emails are from subject line all the way in tends to be more effective. So like my instinct is always to try to be as like professional as possible in the subject line. But the emails that I always see that I open, and I know a lot of other people do, is where not to have like typos or spelling mistakes, but maybe you don't capitalize every first word, or maybe it's not like a full complete sentence where it's like, hey, leave us a review. Something like more casual can work depending on your industry. And that's where a lot of the personalization comes in, is like, your brand, your tone, or if you're an agency and you're working with clients, you're learning their tone. You want to match that in your emails, which leads to where you might want to customize in the actual body. And so when you click on this, this becomes a WYSIWYG, a what you see is what you get type of email editor. And so our simple, like time over time proven templates work. What I would recommend if you were to customize these is only like maybe adjusting something like if you're in the doctor's office, like as the example, instead of saying customers, maybe you change that to say patients. Or if you're a law firm, maybe you change this to say other potential clients. Maybe you change the tone slightly. So if you're a more casual, fun company, maybe you don't want to go with like this standard kind of boilerplate. You want to, throw some more personality into it. I think that's a great way to customize these email templates. But the one thing I would not recommend is making it much longer. And definitely don't ask them to do 50 other things in the email. Remember, you only want to focus on getting them to the review funnel landing page. So, in the Grade Us review funnel, for instance, we have the options to add social media channels for people to follow. I actually recommend people don't do that because it distracts them from the main purpose of leaving the review. You're thinking the same thing, Afshan?
Exactly the same thing. Anytime I do like any onboardings or anything, I'm like, we have this. It's totally up to you, but I highly recommend you don't, because anything else you put on here, it's gonna detract from like what the point is like you're trying to get reviews here. That's it.
Exactly. It's like almost one of those don't reinvent the wheel and kiss, like keep it simple, stupid. I think those are great axioms when it comes to something as simple as requesting reviews. The other thing is, you notice there we have the 3 emails here. I find that's like the really great middle ground between annoying customers with asking them too much time or asking them too many times to leave the review, but at the same time understanding that people are busy. And if you're only sending one email review request, it totally makes sense that they would forget from time to time. And that's not on them, it's just we're very busy people. And so that's why 3 makes the most sense. Although you could reduce it to 2, or you could add, as many as you want and set up, label it how you want it to be labeled, when you want the email to go out, what the new subject line would be, and what you're going to have in the email HTML, in the actual body. And if you do, for whatever reason, make a mistake, you can always easily reset the mail templates and just go back to start from scratch. Do you see people adding more emails or reducing it, Afshan, when you're interacting with customers, or do they typically
Don't
just
hardly
use the
ever.
3 emails?
Yeah, I don't hardly ever see more. I sometimes see 2, but I mean, majority, I want to say like high majority, just keep it at 3.
Exactly. That's what seems to make sense to me too. The other thing is on the second and third ones, you can also adjust the send time. So you might want to make sure that that's at a time that feels relevant to your customers. So if you are, offering a business, if you're a B2C business and it's something that they're not doing related to work, it might make sense to actually send the email review request after normal business hours. Whereas, if it is B2B related, it might make sense, or just always earlier in the day when it's the first thing in their inbox and maybe they have, a moment to do it while they're, reading the news or drinking a coffee or whatever. So that's it in terms of setting up your email drip campaigns and some of the best practices here, personalizing, based on your industry, based on the tone, based on, the send times and how many you want to send out, based on, knowing your customer audience. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the ways that you can upload recipients to receive the emails? And we will take questions at the end as well. So if there are any questions and you want to save them for later, no problem. Okay, cool. So when it comes to, any other tips that you want to provide? Actually, I'm sorry, I should have asked if there's
No,
anything that
I
I
just
didn't
wanted to
cover.
point out that that there's like the time zone right there. So
Yeah.
we obviously pull that from well, by default it's East Coast if you don't connect a location or add your business information into the funnel area. But if for some reason you want to change that, you can do that over in the funnel area where it's the business location info. So if it is like a service area business and things just recently changed with Google, and so we don't automatically pull that information for service area businesses, if you want to change the time zone, you can do that in the business info area in the funnel.
Huge. That's really helpful. And it's also something good to know if you are a West Coast business but
Mhm.
have, East Coast customers, you want to be cognizant of that when you're setting the send time here, to just make sure that you are actually providing, sending out the emails that's appropriate for who your customer base is.
Exactly.
One last thing I did want to mention actually, though, is we do have these placeholders down here, and I am going to talk a little bit about the recipient custom fields in a moment. But that basically you can use any of these to personalize, whether it's first name, last name. The profile name is the way you set up the business. So Taco and Pina, that's what it would appear if you put that in the profile name. You could put your logo in there when you upload the logo. And the other thing that you can do is this recipient custom field is one use case that I found that works really well for this is if you wanted to work with individual employees who are asking for reviews and you wanted, for instance, the email review request to seem to come from that employee, you can add in the tag section or in the custom field section who the employee is and then use this template personalization in your email. So you can have it come like at the end saying, signed, and then you put recipient custom field in between these two brackets, and it would be from the employee who was entered in that form. So going on to recipients, it's relevant because now we're going to talk about how you can add recipients to start receiving these email drip campaigns. Now, there are a couple of different ways. Primarily, we have what most people use is this simple one-to-one individual add a recipient where you come, to the dashboard, review requests, you click this button, and this is where you're seeing is the email address, the first name, the last name, and the tags. Now, the tags is also that custom recipient field, which is optional and how you would be able to use that. One thing you'll notice that you don't see here is the SMS. I have not set up text messaging, which we're not really covering in this webinar, but if you had SMS set up as well, you'd be able to add and choose whether it's both from email and SMS, only email. But you would just come in here and add these individual, you need the email, you need the first name, everything else is optional. Add the recipient, they go in here, and then when they're added in there, you can activate them, when they come up. So, if I were to add, put my own email and put Garrett in there. And help me out again, Afshan, when you add this and you activate it, you can either activate it manually here. If you don't, it usually happens in the morning, correct? That they get auto activated?
Yeah, so it's kind of just like a time frame because we have so many emails going out in the mornings. So it's usually between like 6 and 9-ish East Coast time. Important to note, but something we're actually working on is the auto activate does not go by time zone. I mean, it goes just by East Coast. So that's something to keep in mind right now. If you're like on the West Coast and you do auto activate, like there's potential of it going out at like 3 o'clock in the morning your time. So that's important to point
Yeah.
out. But it's on the
Yeah.
product roadmap to fix.
And I'd also, point out that this is for the ones that are scheduled to go out immediately. Like anyone that you have sent out scheduled for next day at a specific time will go
Right.
at that time.
Yeah, so if that's a concern, then definitely I would recommend using next day and then using like your own time zone and timing.
Exactly. So, and just to know, by default, this is turned to not auto activate, in which case you would need to activate them yourself. Um, Alternatively, and you can adjust this, turn this on, and you can also, decide how many you have per day. And that's naturally going to probably be tied to the volume of customers that you interact with. So, if you have a restaurant and you're getting, hundreds of people in every day, you might want this to be higher. Whereas, if you're a law firm and you don't have a ton of clients, you might not even want to auto activate it all. Do you have any best practices you recommend when it comes to auto activation, Afshan?
Uh, it's such a fine line. I definitely recommend smaller chunks than bigger chunks. Number one, you think about how many emails you have in your, it's kind of, I'm going to make it as short as I can. You think about how many emails you have in the drip campaign, right? And most of them are going to go out at most, they're going to live in there for 7 days. So this kind of goes into like a little bit more detail of like the active column, but like there's a limit to how many active recipients you can have in the active tab at a time. So yeah, see right there, the active recipient limit is 100. So if you put 100 in there at one time, there is a possibility that like 70 of those, if people don't click or they're getting the full drip campaign, they're going to live in there for a full 7 days, and you're only going to be able to like rotate out just a dozen or 2 dozen or whatever. So I would just recommend doing it in smaller just chunks. Just make sure you're getting a flow through your active tab.
Exactly. And that's always a good thing for you to pay attention to seeing how many people are opening the emails. And if you're not seeing a high open rate, that might be a good reason for you to adjust the subject line of your campaign and try out a different version that might, work better. Do it in a week or 2 week stints, depending on the volume of your customers. See if that works, stick with that. If not, go back to the original or try something different and experiment with it to find what works best for your audience. So once that happens, and to Afshan's point, they'll go from the in queue to the active. They'll be here. I wanted to address this before we move on to the other ways to add recipients. Is that when you go over to the email text activity and the recipients, this is where you can set it to how the campaign potentially might deactivate. So the options here is if they were to open one of the emails, so they're set up, they're activated to receive the 3 email campaign. If this is set to yes and they open that first email, they're not going to receive email 2 or 3. A lot of people will do that because it's like low touch. However, we see most people will do the deactivate recipients on click, and that means when they click the button in the email, assuming they would then go to the review funnel and complete the process of either writing the positive review or writing the internal feedback if it was a negative experience. There's that kind of educated assumption that they'll go through that. However, if you weren't sure, and wanted to have them go through the entire process, you can have it deactivate recipients on click through, which means they'll actually go to the funnel and then click through from the funnel to the final review site. I think either of 2 or 3 options make a ton of sense. I understand why most people would prefer the deactivate recipients on click. What's your instinct, Afshan, when it comes to choosing between these 3 options?
To be honest, if we're talking about what most people use, it's deactivate on click through actually. They
Yeah.
want to make sure that they're actually getting out to that review site, which I mean makes sense to me. It means that they might live in the active tab for a little bit longer, but you're getting them as far as you can get them before it's really up to them. So if it were me, I'm actually a big fan of the deactivate on click through. Like obviously, if you have like the bandwidth for it.
I think that makes a ton of sense. It really does. And so that is something that for the most part that you're going to have to go in and adjust yourself. So
Yeah.
you're going to make sure once you set up your emails, you go to the recipients tab and then you come under the in queue over to the email text activity. And that is where you'll be able to adjust this and switch this basically from no there to yes there. So in terms of, we did the individual add a recipient. The second way that you can add recipients is through the bulk upload. So what that would require is either a CSV file or an Excel or XLSX, which is in essence an Excel file. You can download the sample, which I have here. Can you all see the Excel comes up? You never know with GoToWebinar if you can see when you go to a different window, but I'm pretty sure I'm sharing my screen here. So. Okay. Okay, looks good. So you basically receive this CSV file that can be uploaded in Google Sheets or in Excel, or Apple Numbers if you use that. It has a few different columns here, which is email address, first name, last name, phone number, tags. Now, you need to have it filled out to be either in the email address or the phone number. Obviously, if you don't have SMS set up, you'll only want to do the email address, but you do need that filled out, and you do need the first name filled out. So you'll want to make sure that you have these filled out, that you don't mess with the labels at the top. This has to be here. You will be able, to kind of test it through another bulk upload method, but we have this set up this way, and you can make sure everything is set the way you want it to, and I'll show you how that looks. And then here's the tag section. So here's where you might want to, add employee names as the tag, or maybe if you have a car repair shop that also does sales, like you might want to differentiate between your sales team and your car repair reviews, which are going to be two different types of reviews depending on the auto dealership, and you can tag it that way. Are there any other use cases for tags that you've run into, Afshan, that's really effective?
Not a ton. It's not a hugely widely used feature. So I mostly honestly see it with like, like car dealerships or doctor's offices where it's like you're specifically tagging like who that person saw.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So that makes sense in terms of the employees as the use case that we see, or those different specific. The other one, yeah, doctor's office. If it's the same practice but has multiple doctors, you might want to use the tag
Or
there.
different specialties. Like if you go to a doctor's office where it's like you have, one person who sees dermatology, you have an internist, you have like different things you can put like what specialty they were seeing.
Right, and that'll help you like in the reviews too to filter, or in terms of your email completion rate, or it can
Right.
give you customer service insights for sure.
Sure.
So we upload, you click on this button, you have your list all formatted the way that you want it to be. So here's where I was talking about where you can make sure that it's lined up. So it did pull it. All of the green here is accurate from the email address, the phone number, the first name. If you did have a custom field, you would be able to line those up and pull it from this. It would appear if I had another column, and I'd be able to pull that over to add for the custom field for that personalization. So we continue to upload. You make sure it all looks good there. Everything is exactly as I want it to be. I click upload, and those will all automatically be added to the in-queue recipient. So okay, so it already had Garrett at Great Us was in there, so it's not going to upload it again.
Yeah.
But it did upload the other two, and that functions exactly as we want it to, because if you were to upload someone who's already in your list and you don't want to upload them multiple times and annoy them, say they're a repeat customer, the system is catching that. Speaking of which, there is another way where you can adjust so it doesn't upload the same person multiple times, is in this completed section. There is this setting here that you can find under recipients that will allow you to, for when you do upload the same customer a second time, if you by default have uploaded them within 6 months, they will not be uploaded again, but you can change this. You've encountered that a few times, right, Afshan?
Yes. Most people don't change that number. I do have, I mean, again, I think you said this, but it depends on what kind of industry you're in. If you're a coffee shop that sees somebody twice a week, you might set that at 5, or, 14 days or something like that. If you're a doctor's office who generally you see, annual patients, you're just like a family practice, you might set that at, 180 days, maybe more. So it's just a matter of like, it's literally specific to like what industry you're in or what business you're in.
Exactly, and I think that's something that we take pride in at Grade Us is just the ability for all these customization features to really match what your specific industry or business is looking for. And this is just another case where it's just a slightly nuanced thing, but what works for you is what, you should make sure that you go and make that adjustment. Now, one quick thing that Mike did ask, he wanted to know, for the employee tags, can we see the results of reviews online by employee for companies that want to track service team members who have encouraged reviews? So naturally, Mike, when it comes to attribution of the actual review site, we can't tie it to the Grade Us process or to actually coming from the review funnel. That said, most of the times you can line up the name of the person who left the review on the third-party review site with the review request in our tracking. So while it won't connect and have the tag in the third-party review, you can usually do a one-to-one and check, and that's why it's really useful to have those tags to see which employee asked for it. One thing I do recommend, though, is you can do from time to time is when you set up the email drip campaign, you can always prompt in that email campaign to ask how their, that customer's experience was with the employee. And sometimes like kind of seeding that idea of mentioning the employee's name is more likely for them to mention it in their review, which will ultimately make it easier to track. I hope that answers your question. So so we went through the individual manually updated recipients. We went through uploading a bulk. Beautiful. Okay, great. Happy to help there. The additional ways that you can do it is through this client and staff form. And so the client staff form has two different purposes. One is if you wanted to let your employees upload recipients without necessarily giving them access to the Grade Us dashboard, you can give us this link that's connected to each of the review funnels. It's password protected, so you can provide them with the username and the password, or if you wanted to bypass that password, you can give them this magic link, and basically they could have this bookmarked and uploaded to or on their browser. So the employee could then individually add recipients as they engage with them, or they can upload the bulk CSV XLSX file themselves. This is also really effective if you're an agency or reseller and want to give this to your clients to be able to upload customers individually or in bulk. Now, when you set up a white label version of the Grade Us platform, it will actually replace the Grade Us logo. When you set up your brand, it'll replace the Grade Us logo with your agency or reseller logo. So the client doesn't necessarily know that you're using Grade Us and it's a full white label experience. One other thing to mention here is that you can customize this. So you can change any of the copy to make it as easy as possible for your clients or for your employees to upload the review. So any instructions that you want to add there, you can add your own custom CSS, you can add your own profile logo. The other thing is under the advanced, this is where you could add that personalization that will come up in, from going back to the review request placeholder. What they put in the custom field here, and you can, customize, like, say you do want it to be the name of an employee. You can actually put that there to make it that much easier and customize this form for your agency's clients or just for your own employees. And then the second version of this is the opt-in form. This is ideal for using the having an in-app like kiosk mode. It's different than the review first request. It's basically just putting the sign up opt-in form on like a tablet once. So if, with COVID, some states opening up again, if you're doing the in-store visits and you have an iPad there, you can basically put this link on the browser and have this there for the customers to opt in to receive the review requests. Do you have any thoughts with that, Afshan, with either of those client or staff-facing forms?
Not a ton. I think like what you went over was sufficient. Just one of them is, yeah, like you said, one of them is client facing and one of them is more customer, I guess, like you give to your customers to
Yeah, it's like that end user customer facing that you would want them to see. So,
Right.
a lot of people use that effectively. Obviously, COVID switched things up with, people not being able to go in store. So, until your store is open, you're probably not going to want to do it. I will say, if you do use an iPad as you're reopening up, definitely have signage and health precautions that, highlight that you're doing your best to keep it clean. It might be a matter of like wiping it down, or just having some sort of you know pencil
I've
that
seen people that put like they put those like boxes of just like really old school like lunch lady plastic gloves, and you can
Mhm.
still kind of like do stuff with that. So, or there's hand sanitizer there. Like, yeah, just be safe.
Exactly. Yeah. Be safe with it. I mean, the other option too is offering printed cards, which you can use these templates we have that allow you with a QR code, or you can even use the signage to have the QR code there and tell them with instructions to scan it, which will take them to the review funnel right in store. The QR code is, more and more people are using those because with like a native camera device, like on an iPhone, if you actually hold it up to just your camera, it'll take you to the, open up the browser on the phone and take you there. So QR codes are very much in vogue these days.
Right.
Okay, so last thing as we get to the end of the hour, I did want to save time for this and questions is Zapier, which is now available. So Zapier is basically the ability to automate and have different applications, software applications, talk to each other without having to know any sort of code or development, especially for marketers or small business owners. It really simplifies the process.
Love it.
We just recently got out of beta, so you can find Zapier on their app very easily. Now, one thing I do want to point out is in order to use the Zapier, you do need to be a paying customer of Grade Us. You need to be on the agency plan or higher. You do need to get the API key, which if you reach out to Afshan support at grade.us, we can help you get access to that API key when you're on the agency plan. And you do need to set up your own Zapier account, which is a monthly fee of like $25 for one of their basic plans. The way that it works is using Zapier, you can have your POS system or your CRM or even your financial system like QuickBooks will allow you that when something happens in one of those apps, it can trigger the email review request coming from Grade Us. Is it a separate API key for each location? No, so I'll show you. You just need the one main API key, Mike, and then through Zapier, you'll be able to choose which location or which profile seat you're going to use for that specific Zap. The nice thing too is if you're doing this for clients, if you're an agency and you're concerned about white labeling, as long as you get the credentials from your clients for whatever CRM, whether it's like HubSpot or email service provider like MailChimp, you can do this all behind the scenes, and they don't necessarily need to know that Grade Us is the app behind setting up their automation. So in this example, what I'm going to show is how I would be able to do it through MailChimp. So if I were to basically get a new person added to a MailChimp list, then it would as a new subscriber, it would automatically add them to the email review request campaign through Grade Us. Now, with HubSpot, you might do this as like if you have a new customer added to your HubSpot CRM, you could have that be the trigger. Really simple. So once you get into your Zapier account, you search for Grade Us. So you'll notice that Grade Us comes up right there, and we're going to create what's called a Zap. So now I'm going to say connect. Actually, I'm going to do this reverse. I'm going to have when something happens in MailChimp, trigger something in Grade Us. Okay. So in MailChimp, when I add a new subscriber, then it's going to create a mail recipient in Grade Us. Really simple, right? So we're going to do that. And so we're going to create the Zap. So here's how we set up the Zap. We use the Zap. The first thing it's going to ask us to do is to connect whatever your first app is. Now, obviously, there are over 2,000 Zapier apps, so there's whatever your imagination, can inspire. You can find the app most likely it's connected to Zapier and connected to us. You will need to go through this process with your own credentials. But for MailChimp as the example, I'll find my MailChimp Grade Us account. I'll click continue. I'll choose the value here. So in this case, it's actually going to have, choose like one of our lists. So I have this little demo list set up here that I am going to connect it to. But similar to Grade Us, Mike, I'll show you the specific domain. But like here on MailChimp, it's allowing me to pick a specific subscriber list that I've set up. And that's the case with most. So like with HubSpot or QuickBooks, you can set up that specific account that's connected to. Okay, so we're going to test that MailChimp is set up correctly. Gives us the information. I've got Boris's info in here. So, oh, good, it's Boris. It's got his first name, last name, email, all the other information that I would need. So that looks right. So we'll click go to continue here. And so now I'm going to connect it to Grade Us. And so we have it connected to the Grade Us app. We'll have it connected to the create mail recipient, which is the trigger. On the other hand, on the other side of these, the other use case for the Grade Us Zapier app would be if you get a new review, like that's the same way that our review monitoring works. You can trigger something to happen with another app when you get a new review. We're not covering that today since this is more about the email review request, but you can do a lot of creative things with whenever you get a new review that comes in through the Grade Us API can trigger another app through Zapier. So I'll click connect here. So I'm going to sign into Grade Us. So the way that this is going to work, I made sure to not have this connected, but I'm basically going to go to, this is load up. Okay, so I'm going to find my Grade Us account when I log in. So this is where I'm going to be adding the API token. So to do that, you go to your Grade Us account, you go under your account here. You'll see the API. So, this is mine. It connects to the Grade Us, all my dummy accounts. You'll need to get your own, and that's how it knows that which account to connect to. So I come back here, I plug in my API token. Okay, boom, it's connected here. So now it knows that I'm connected to my Grade Us. We'll continue. And so here, to answer your question, Mike, here's where you'll choose which of your seats that you want it connected to. So in this case, I'll find our Taco and Pina account. Okay, and so now it'll connect. So because it's connected to my MailChimp list, you go through this process of just making sure that the information lines up. So for the first name, I'll have Boris's first name here. Okay. For the last name, we'll have Boris's last name here. Boom. And then in this case, we're only using email address, but if you're using the SMS, you'd be able to do the phone number there and any tags that you've set up there and make sure that that lines up with the information that you're plugging in. So if you do use a different, CRM or whatever, and it has a different type of tag, you'd be able to, make sure that that's connected one-to-one. So like MailChimp actually has tags, so I would be able to use that if I had a tag set up in my MailChimp list. So click connect. And so that's pretty much all there is to it. Naturally, you're going to want to test and review. It's probably sending one to Boris right now. I'm sure he got it. And then it's just a matter of turning it on. And so now anytime that someone was added to that MailChimp subscriber list, they would then go right into the Grade Us active recipients account and start receiving review requests. Mike wants to know, can Grade Us action be smart SMS request funnel? I'm not sure. Can you clarify, Mike? So you can have it be SMS, and are you saying that it would only do SMS and not email, but if you put in both? That I don't think so. Ashton, maybe we might have to ask Carson if that's the case, but I think it would still send the request to both the SMS and the email, because that is an option. Do you know Afshan?
I'm actually like not super like well versed.
Yeah. But I'm gonna say I will follow up with you after this, Mike. But I'm gonna say that I do think it would send to both and wouldn't choose SMS over email if both are provided. But I will find out for you. So, okay, we're getting to the end of the hour. We've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to go over here. We do have a little time for questions. Are there any other questions related to email review request best practices that Afshan and I can answer, or just anything generally for Grade Us that we can answer while you have our undivided attention? We really do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us on this Thursday afternoon on the East Coast, morning on the West Coast. If not, I do want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to Afshan and myself. I'm Garrett at grade.us, Garrett. You can reach Afshan through support, just support@grade.us, and just put Afshan's name in the subject line. I'm throwing you out there, Afshan, as available to our customers.
I'm always available. If I'm not available, I will pass it off to one of my lovely colleagues.
There you go. I mean, that's legit, because Afshan's always, she works so hard. You work so hard. Anyway.
I have my hands in a lot of things. I've been here a long time. I have my hands in a lot of different things. So generally, I mostly handle like our enterprise level accounts at this point. But if I have the time, I'm more than willing to help anybody and everybody who needs it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, you've been working, to your point, you've been working with the product inside and out for the last few years now. So it's awesome, to be able to have this interaction with you, to really know all the nuances and the best practices, having worked with customers all the time. Is there any last tip that you would recommend to our audience before we end the webinar?
Keep it simple and customize it. Those would be my two.
Simple and customize. This is Afshan from Grade Us. I'm Garrett from Grade Us and Traject. Thank you so much for joining us today, and everybody have a great rest of the week, great weekend, and be safe. Bye.
So I thought I needed. Ooh.